Welcome to Civil Discourse, a podcast where participants are free to share their ideas, empathize with other perspectives, and who intend to advance to a better solution to fix a societal ill. We will focus on topics that are particularly complicated. In a time where information is from sources more opinionated than ever, our mission is to find solutions and goals to accelerate the nation's progress with cultural impunity. I'm your host, Todd Furniss. Welcome to today's episode of Civil Discourse, hosted by Todd Furniss. I'm your host, Todd Furniss, and I'm just ecstatic to have Jimmy Crumpacker here today to talk to him about a variety of things. Before we get to that, the administrative issues, of course, take priority. If you like this podcast content, and especially if you like this episode, then please like, share, and subscribe. This is a free podcast, and we need all the subscribers we can get. We think it's a unique forum to have a conversation, a thoughtful conversation, and a good exchange between folks around complicated topics. And we think that as a result of that, there's fewer and fewer fora in which we can do that. So this is specifically designed for that purpose. So we're going to dive in a little bit with Jimmy. Jimmy, welcome. So glad to have you here. We've been friends for a long time, it seems, even though you're a young guy and I'm an old guy, but it's good to see you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and I am. We are good buddies, and even though I have to say that, we come from slightly different generations, you still beat me badly at tennis last time we played. So kudos to you for that.
You must have been recruiting me for something to give up a set.
No. I never give up anything on the tennis court, and it was a thorough thrashing. So well played by you.
Well, thank you for that. But I'm still probably 1 in 100 with you. So tell me, you're embarking on this new journey here, and I wanted to talk to you about that online and make sure I had everything on tape so I could hold it against you in the future. What the heck are you doing? You're running for Congress, and why are you doing it? And what gives rise to this whimsical idea?
Right. So, I am a 7th generation Oregonian. And so we have very deep roots in Oregon. And I love this state. And when I left the state in the early 90s to go to school back on the East Coast, I was gone for almost 20 years. So I went to Georgetown University. I worked up on the Hill for Senator Gordon Smith. And then I moved back in 2012. And the Oregon I moved back to was very different than the Oregon I had left. And so I was looking for opportunities to get involved in the community. I worked on 4 local nonprofit boards, was chair of the board of a major arts organization. I delivered meals once a week for Meals on Wheels. And then a rare opportunity came to run for Congress 2 years ago in the eastern part of the state, which was the only Republican district in Oregon. So I jumped at the opportunity. I got in the race. This was 2020, and I was running against 3 candidates with 42 years of political experience, one of which had run for governor in 2018. And I actually took the lead in that race with about a month to go. And I was over the moon, and then of course COVID hit, and our primary was May 19th. So, our last 2 months of our campaign I was sitting on the couch, and I never thought I'd have the opportunity to run again. And then the redistricting process took place, and Oregon went from 5 seats to 6, and my house in Central Oregon got moved into a brand new district that includes the southern part of Portland, which is where I grew up. So Providence came down and gave me another shot to run for Congress.
Well, I applaud your efforts, and it's a noble cause. On the program here, we are nonpartisan, and because we're really focused on solving problems, and I mean that in all earnestness. But I would submit to you that Oregon is not a state known for its Republican heritage. So as you're deciding to run, what caused you to choose one side or another?
That's a great point, but that's more recent. You have to remember, when I was a kid, we had two Republican senators. Hatfield and Packwood were in the Senate for 30 years and were considered two of the most important senators. In 1994, actually, after the Republicans took over, they were chairs of two of the most important committees. So it's true recently, but and that's part of the problem with gerrymandering, is that, Biden won, maybe 55% of the vote in Oregon, but we only have one Republican out of our 7 federal representatives. So this new district is actually a 50-50 district. It's very purple. So in an environment like this, it gives Oregon an opportunity to elect a second Republican representative for the first time in nearly 2 decades.
So Oregon is famous for Nike. It's famous for great wine. It's famous for lush forests. It's famous for beautiful country and nice people. So, what's your platform on all of that? I mean, how do you work on that state?
Yeah. Well, so unlike Texas, which
We
is
just have
only
nice people, that's all.
no. So Texas is the federal government only manages about 1% of Texas. They manage 53% of the state of Oregon. So we're talking about 32 million acres, which are managed by the federal government. So they have a very outsized influence on our business and industry. And when I was a kid, the timber industry was, employed 85,000 blue collar jobs and was a huge engine of growth. And unfortunately, the federal government no longer allows a lot of harvesting of timber on the federally managed lands. So it would be like Texas no longer allowing oil companies to drill for oil. The only difference is we didn't have the opportunity to fight them because, the land in Texas is privately held. So that's a major issue. And then, because my new district touches Portland, the issues that have been happening in Portland as far as defunding the police are a major concern. Unfortunately, Portland last year set its all-time murder record. Murders were actually up 3x of what they were pre-pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with the fact we've lost a third of our police force, either to early retirement or just quitting outright. So those are a couple of major issues. And then I am focused on inflation. You can probably see my old screens here. I was a commodities trader for 13 years. I used to stare at those for a long time. And so inflation, oil prices, those are things that really matter to me. And I think are really important to voters, because when the price of gasoline goes up 50%, that really takes out from people's bottom line.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just so sorry to hear that the city of Portland, which is such a beautiful city filled with such nice people, has suffered such a great tragedy. And I hope that, Portland gets moved back in the right direction. It's an important city to the country.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, I was reflecting on this a little while ago. Didn't one of the nominees for BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, wasn't she charged for spiking trees?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a great question. But, that was a tactic during the timber wars in the early 90s, which was, spiking a tree is very dangerous because you basically put a huge nail into a tree. And then if you use a chainsaw to cut that tree down and it hits the nail, the chainsaw kicks back and can cause death. So that would be a very serious charge. I haven't heard that, but
for some reason I recall that as being the case. But if it is, it's horrible. If it's not, I'm sorry to inappropriately repeat it. So let's talk a little bit about the issues that you're focused on. Obviously, forestry management is big, land management is big. What else are you looking at, and what else do Oregonians care about?
Well, I mean, clearly the federal government's management of its budget is a big thing. I look at the $30 trillion deficit as a major issue. And within that, an issue that has kind of shocked me recently, but I've had to learn about from running has been healthcare costs and the cost of Medicare and reading the trustees report was it's a real eye opener. And it's 270 pages. It's very dry, but it is worth reading just because the numbers are so shocking, and the direction that the trust funds are headed in is really is something that the federal government needs to get its hands around.
So you're saying we shouldn't read it because of its pure literary genius, but because of the shock value of the numbers. So what did you learn out of that? What came from that?
It's
like
shocking.
3 big takeaways. What would the 3 big takeaways be?
Well, so the fact that they've been warning the federal government, the executive and the House of Reps and the Senate, the branches of government that are responsible for this, they've been warning them the last 4 years that they're going to run out of money, and now that they're predicting that they're going to run out of money in 2026. So that's a huge takeaway. And if you look at the reports, the trust funds not that long ago had about 150% of their expenditures in cash sitting on their books. That number in 2020 went to below 50%, which is the lowest number in records that I've seen. And the records I saw only went back to 1990, but still, that is a really shocking number.
So let's put this into context for people. In 1965, when LBJ signed the Medicare Act into law, the budgeted amount for the payment of all Medicare costs for that year was $10 billion. Do you have any recollection of what it was in 2021?
I believe it was $926 billion, if memory serves correct.
I think you're spot on there, which would make it about a 30x increase per person in costs.
Yeah.
And so one of the concerns that a lot of people have when they see things like infrastructure bills come by and Build Back Better come back, and you have some entitlements buried in, there's this notion that entitlements will not only remain but grow, and that there won't be any controls. And when the Build Back Better was first analyzed by OMB, they said, they took a bunch of stuff out that was supposed to sunset, and the senators got a little fussy with that and said, hey, not so fast there, Kemosabe, because everybody knows it doesn't go away. So as you're looking at the CMS report and you're saying, holy cow, 2026, they're projecting bankruptcy. And because I've shared the same report and studied a little bit myself, one of the other things that's troubling is that the rate of growth of the cost over the projected term is faster than the rate of GDP growth for the nation. So we're in a hole and we're digging deeper without funding it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you look at the Part B annual growth over the last 5 years, I believe it's been 8.5%, compared to GDP growth of maybe 2.8%, roughly. And I think that they're projected, now granted, these are projections, but still they're projecting 7% growth over the next 5 years. And so, they're expecting that by 2045, the cost overruns are going to be 45%.
Wow.
Which is really shocking. And some other numbers that I thought were important to share with your audience are that in 1970, 1/12 of Social Security benefits were the SMI, meaning these Medicare benefits. That number went to 1/3 in 2005, and then after Part D was passed, that number went to 50% of total benefits.
Holy cow.
So think about that growth in benefits for seniors. It's an incredible growth, and unfortunately, it's not slowing down.
So put differently, that's gone from 8% roughly to 50%.
Yes, I mean, it's shocking. It's totally shocking. And if you look at the demographics that are happening around the world, not just in the United States, we're not unique, but with the amount of retirees that are coming into the system, we keep adding more and more, and especially in the United States with the baby boomer population, we're going to be adding more and more beneficiaries, and the numbers are not going to get better anytime soon. In fact, they project by, I believe it is in 75 years, so 2096, I believe is what they said, there'll be a $4.9 trillion shortfall.
Wow. So to put it into perspective, right now, for those listening, I'm in the baby boomer category, and we are graduating 10,000 people a day to their 55th birthday. Okay, so that means that the numbers when you get to 65 are, bouncing about the same numbers. And so the people qualifying daily for Medicare is a vast number of people.
Yeah, no, I think the numbers, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's 62 million people that qualify right now. And that number is going to increase. And you've seen this over the years, right? Because when the Great Recession happened in 2009, that was the first time where we really saw Medicare, the expenditures exceed. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that income levels and therefore the tax levels were going down. And so because of the COVID-19, I think we're seeing an acceleration of people retiring. So I think that this is going to have an impact that the trustees didn't even speak about moving forward, because the job market right now is so in flux. People are making life decisions, i.e. retiring early, and that's going to have a major impact on Medicare. And I don't think people really appreciate that.
That's a very powerful insight, very, very powerful insight, because I don't think a whole lot of people are connecting those dots, the correlation between COVID and the governmental response to COVID, and then early retirement, and then the corresponding cost to Medicare associated with that.
Yeah. Well, and, if you look at Medicare, which I think is very relevant because obviously the economy has grown significantly since 2000, it was 2.25% of expenses of GDP. That number is at 4% in 2020, and then it's going to grow to 6% by 2045, and then they estimate 8.5% by 2095. So, even in the last 20 years, it hasn't doubled, but it's gone up a significant amount.
It is kind of like the inverse of the value of compounding interest, right? It's a compounding we really don't want to see. If we're investors, we want to invest in something with compounding effects. If we're taxpayers, we don't want to see that kind of an impact. So it begs the question, in the last cycle, there was a really, really heated discussion led by Senator Sanders about this idea of Medicare for all. And I can't imagine a more accelerated form of national bankruptcy than Medicare for all. If you're taking a look at what's going on just with the costs of the covered population today, it seems to me if we spread these benefits, it would only be magnified several times over. One case in point, Medicaid pays about 80% of cost. I'm using rough numbers here, and Medicare pays about 120% of cost. So if we took, and you may recall, I wrote a book on healthcare called The 60% Solution. And the reason I call it the 60% solution is because roughly, using broad numbers and rounding, 20% of our population is on Medicaid and 20% of our population is on Medicare. So at 330 million people in the United States, your 62-ish million would be about right. So if you got if Medicare is paying 120% and Medicaid's paying 80%, then all of a sudden we're giving a lift, if we use Medicare pricing, to everybody who's receiving Medicaid. So the prices go up automatically by a substantial percentage point. Now, I want to use something. One of the things that I think is troubling for people is they throw these numbers around like it's no big deal, right? And the running joke is one of the senators said, "Well, I'm just glad that the other side doesn't know what a gazillion is." So I like to put this in perspective. I once asked somebody how to think about $1 billion. Like, what is $1 billion? I said, think about that for a second. How would you describe $1 billion? $1 billion is $1 million a year for 1,000 years.
Very hard to spend $1 billion unless you're the
Well,
federal government.
exactly. Then they can do it without breathing hard. But I'm sitting here thinking $1 trillion, and we're looking at basically at $926 billion. We're just a hair under $1 trillion of healthcare expenditure last year alone. How do
Yeah.
we arrest this? Let's imagine, you get to be king for a day. You go into Congress and you have the bully pulpit. You say, "Hey, I'm
Sure.
Jimmy from Oregon. What are you going to do?"
Well, I mean, clearly this is a very challenging problem because when you promise your citizens certain rights, and Medicare, I believe, is one of those rights that has been promised, so you can't take it away from people. But certainly we can look at extremely wealthy people, i.e. the billionaires, and say, can there be a means test? Does everybody who is making millions of dollars or worth tens of millions of dollars need to be on Medicare? The other thing that I would look at is drug prices. You saw the clear jump. We went from a third to a half once Part D got put onto Medicare. And so if the federal government were able to negotiate prices with drug companies, that would certainly make it a little bit easier to stomach these surging prices. On your last podcast, you talked about the fact that, aspirin bottle costs $60 when it cost, 1 cent to make. And then you also talked about if you pay cash as opposed to using your insurance, paying $500 versus, I forgot your exact example, but $3,000. I mean, those are significant differences. And if you look at the way insurance is handled, unfortunately, we have this bifurcated system where each state is kind of its own king. And we don't allow insurance companies to go across state lines in there's certain regulations revolved around it. Now, I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure you know a lot more than I do. But, if I look at the statistics on the Medicare beneficiaries, the private Medicare plans have risen from 12.8% in 2004 to nearly 40% in 2020. So, I mean, think about that rise in private plans that are then being put under the umbrella of Medicare. So you're seeing a lot of expenses roll through there. And a lot of this has to do with, unfortunately, administrative costs, right? I mean, if you look at hospitals' bottom lines, the amount of money they spend on administrators is crazy. And then also, I would love to see some reforms when it comes to being able to sue doctors and the legal system. Don't think is one that protects. I think it's a huge drain on the system.
So let me see if I can kind of back up on that. So I hear you say means testing as an option.
Yeah.
I hear you say drug price reform as an option, and there's more to unpack there in just a second. And then I hear you say tort reform. So
Tort reform, exactly.
So on the drug testing, on the drug issue, I did a podcast with a guy who runs by the moniker of Pharmacy Stan, a really interesting guy. And one of the things he pointed out was the fact that we have all these oligopolies that have formed in different areas of the supply chain. So you got the drug manufacturers, and there's some oligopolies there. And then you have the drug distributors, and there are oligopolies there. And there's cross ownership between the manufacturers, the distributors, and the TPAs. There's oligopolies. There are oligopolies there, and then the retail entities, pharmacies, and so there are oligopolies there. And so now all of a sudden you have this cross ownership, which then acts contrary to good pricing pressure. We have something called that Steve Daines, senator from Montana, passed called KIRA. And I did a podcast with Senator Daines a while back. KIRA stands for the Competitive Health Insurance Reform Act, which is a very, very short law. It's something like 1 page. And what it did is it subjected health insurance companies, which are regulated primarily by states, to federal antitrust laws. They've been exempted since the 50s under the McGarren Act. And so one of the things that we might want to examine is another tool in the tool box is, the ability to examine or pursue some antitrust issues with regards to these overlaps. I'm going to throw something out. I recognize I'm catching you completely off guard with this, so let's just play with the idea for a second. When President Johnson signed the Medicare Act into law, the average person retired at about age 65. The life expectancy was only about 2 years after that. So,
Right.
the time that the recipient of the Medicare got benefits was very short. Having said that, you correctly point out that the nation has made a promise to those paying into the system that they're going to get a benefit in the future by virtue of their having paid into the system. Wouldn't another idea being to stagger the promise being made so that 20-somethings have a promise that says instead of the benefit beginning at age 65, it's going to be projected retirement minus 5 or 10 or something like that. So you're saying we're going to get we're going to try and model this after something closer to the original design, which was a life expectancy of less than 5 years after you retired. It would encourage people to work longer, which we think is a good idea, because a lot of people die not long after they stop working because their energy levels, they don't have the structure and the energy and the drive to go do a bunch of stuff. It's not because they're not particularly useful to the economy. They're valuable people to the economy. They're important to the economy, and they have a lot to contribute. So have you thought about something like that where maybe we're tiering the benefits based on the age and when the promise is made to the individual?
Yeah, I mean that I've read about those ideas, and it's something that I'd really want to study because it would be incredibly complicated to put into practice, right? I mean,
Yep.
what age do you? I'm 43, so do you say, okay, does my generation, are we the first ones, or do you go to the 20s, or do you say, or is it the people that haven't been born yet, right? So it's a very complicated issue to unpack, but is a reasonable one to think about because, people are living a lot longer and a lot more productive lives. I mean, the numbers were slightly skewed in the last census. I think this was the first time that white men average age actually went down, but I think that was due to the opioid crisis, because you had a lot of premature deaths of people in their 20s. But yes, I mean, that is certainly something that is worth studying, because when they set up the program, it didn't look anything like it does now. As you mentioned earlier, this was a $10 billion program, and now it's $926 billion. And as I mentioned, in 1970, it was a 12th of benefits. Now it's half of the benefits. So the problem that I really have is when I look at the solutions that are coming out of Washington, is you're not seeing anything that's concrete. You're not seeing anyone really taking a stand. And when the trustees say, the last 4 years, we're telling you we're going to run out of money in 4 years' time, and the inaction is really inexplicable. So it is going to take bold leadership, and certainly the things we've discussed earlier are going to be critical for that, because it's going to have to be a multifaceted solution.
And you're right, it is a bit of a Gordian knot. Again, life expectancy was probably something around 67, 68 years old in 1965. Today, for males, it's 78 years old, and for females, it's 83 years old. And so your benefit time has expanded dramatically, and it would be complicated to implement. But I'm not sure we have much of a choice. But I think your thinking is fresh on this. I mean, you're coming about it from a new perspective, and you're going to bring important perspective to bear on the problem. And I think you'll bring a sense of urgency to the matter. I think one could assert this is almost a breach of fiduciary duty on the part of lawmakers not to address this problem now. We've got to get our arms around it. I don't know what happens. I don't know how you solve the problem in 2026 if you don't start working on it today. printing money seems to be now time honored, but is not a good idea as a way of solving problems in the future. And I certainly don't recommend it for solving the problem in 2026.
No, I mean, if you look at the inflation we're going through right now, it's unprecedented, right? And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that the federal government has been printing money like they've never had before. But the trends, in Medicare expenses are pretty shocking. The fact that in 2020 there was a $60 billion cost overrun, and that's up from $5 billion in 2019 and only $1.6 billion in 2018. And we actually did run a surplus in 2016 and 2017. So, but it's been accelerating, and the economy has changed dramatically. As we all know, COVID has changed everybody's lives and has made people rethink. And so I'm worried that these numbers are going to accelerate even further and faster over the next few years.
So are your constituents worried about this? Are they thinking about this? Are you having conversations with people in the field about this?
I wish this was the case. It's almost as if nobody's paying attention. I don't, and to me, it feels as though neither side, either the Democrats or Republicans, wants to take on this issue. We can see this freight train coming at us. I was at a talk yesterday in Central Oregon, and we sat around and they said, okay, what are the most important issues to you? And 20 issues were listed. This was not listed. It's as if it's not relevant. And literally we're so far down the list and these are very active political people who care deeply about the country, and Medicare did not come across anyone's lips. So it's as if and I'm glad that we're doing this because you are drawing attention to it, but it's as if, you're screaming from the rooftops, and I'm sure a lot of people are, but none of the voters are paying attention.
It would seem to be both apt and incredibly inappropriate to put the old question about, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, right?
Yeah, no.
For an Oregonian, it happens all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, and listen, I don't expect people to read the trustees report, but the numbers that we've outlined and, how quickly the funds have been disappearing is really shocking. And it's not like, I'm quoting numbers in 2045, 2095. That's very abstract. It's very hard to get your head around that.
2026. Yeah, that's a cycle away.
I mean, we're literally talking about from when someone's kid enters high school to graduation. I mean, that's not that far away. 4 years is going to be honest really soon. And it seems irresponsible of the federal government not to deal with the issue. And I'm just hoping that more people will start paying attention because this is a critical issue and it's been bearing down on us now for years. Unfortunately, there aren't any clear solutions, but I'm hoping that this is one issue where both sides of the aisle can get together and make some hard compromises.
Well, America has one thing going for it, many things going for it, but one thing in particular, we have no shortage of really smart people and really industrious people. And we are a very clever nation that can solve problems once we get inspired to do so. So the question is, how do we catalyze the nation to get their arms around this problem? Is the census of Oregon consistent with the census of the United States, or is it younger or older, or how does that map out? More specifically with regard to your district.
Well, so my district is fairly average when it comes to age. We have it's actually a great breakdown of America. We have 25% of the population lives in the county, which is in the mountains, which is very dependent on tourism and skiing and fishing. We have 2 counties which are very rural, which are farm counties, and then 40% of the population of my district is in Portland proper or just outside of Portland. So it's a really interesting combination. It's kind of a tiny. It looks a little bit like America in general. So you get a little piece of of three very distinct and very different regions, which have very, they care about very different issues. But, this is one of those issues that all three types of counties should really care about, because it affects our seniors, and it affects the federal government.
So you have rural urban stratification, and you also have socioeconomic stratification. If that's the case, if it is kind of a bit of a microcosm of the United States, then that means that roughly 20% of your population would be in the age category that cares about the Medicare issue. Is that correct? Is that about right?
That's about right. Yeah. No, I mean, we, the one aspect of my district that doesn't mirror the United States is we don't have a very large minority population. So it's about 10% Hispanic, and then about 90% white. There's 1 or 2% Asian American and African American. But for the most part, we do mirror on most other aspects. We do have very wealthy parts of the district. We have some parts of the district that financially are not doing as well. So it really runs the gambit, and it is hard to find issues that everyone can really focus on, because the mountain region is very different from Portland. Portland region is very different from the farming region. So it's a fascinating district. And, I think that, we're going to be able to connect with issues like this. But I just want people to pay attention to it, which is hard. It's hard to get people to pay attention when, you have issues like law and order, and people care deeply about the economy. Unfortunately, Oregon just found out that our largest employer, which is Intel, decided to build their next series of plants in Ohio. And they're going to spend $35 billion building semiconductor plants in Ohio. And they employ, 22,000 Oregonians. They're the largest private employer in the state of Oregon. So, there are a lot of economic issues that are kind of front of mind. And obviously, the law and order issues are really important for people right now with public safety.
So one of the other issues that I've gotten a lot of attention on and spent a lot of time on is the issue of broadband and how it correlates both to education and then healthcare. The misunderstanding by many people is the fact that they believe that broadband is a function of socioeconomics. People can't afford it. When in fact, I'm sorry, not that it's a rural urban divide issue, meaning people in rural areas can get it, not that people can't afford it. The reality is that both are a case. And it seems to me like that's an issue, spot on for you. You probably have both issues in your district where you've got both people who can't afford it and where it's not available because of the rural nature and the mountainous nature of the community. One of the things that we found, I did a microeconomic research report here in Dallas where I was stunned to conclude that over 30% of Dallas County residents pay more than 3% of their after-tax income for access to broadband, which sounds like it's not a whole lot, but it's a lot when you think there's more than they pay for education. But what's really damning is the fact that that's to get access to the 2010 standard of broadband. In other words, that's 4 meg down and 1 meg up. That's incredibly slow. You can't we couldn't be doing this Zoom call, this podcast right now in that kind of environment because there'd be insufficient bandwidth. You can't even imagine trying to do telemedicine or telehealth or trying to do, remote schooling in those circumstances. Is that an issue that your constituents are looking at as well?
Absolutely. Greg Walden, who I tried to replace in the U.S. House, was a huge proponent of rural broadband and actually helped lead the passage of some really significant bills. But I think, as you said in Dallas, what we've seen out of the school system is how critical it is to have high-speed broadband because, sadly, Oregon over the last 30 years has dropped significantly in its rankings of schools. We're in the bottom 5 in a lot of categories, unfortunately. And the COVID epidemic has just made the separation between the haves and the have-nots even more significant, because the people with great technology at home and high speed and in schools, especially in private schools versus public schools, the difference in hours learned has been significant. I have a good friend whose son in 2020 was only going to school for 20 minutes a week in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. Whereas I know I've had other friends that their kids were going for 5 hours a day. And if you think about how the gap that
it's insurmountable.
creates, and already it's hard enough. And the studies bear out the amount of school time and there's a very interesting study talking about kindergarten and getting ahead early, how important that is for later in life, and the fact that rates for income go up dramatically, dealing with literally how much schooling you've had at an early part of your life. And sadly, this is just going to exacerbate that problem in Oregon. Not only in Oregon, but in Dallas and across the country. I mean, and I think it happens in every area of the U.S.
So I heard a study the other day announced that said that we've lost, or young people have lost, on the order of $17 trillion of earning capacity because of this remote learning issue.
It's shocking, and
it's tragic. I mean,
yeah. Well, and I think it's going to take years to study this problem, because we don't really know the outcomes of not teaching for a year or two. But I think what we're going to see is over the course of the next couple of years, teachers are going to have to make up lessons that should have been taught years ago. And unfortunately, we're not going to see the outcomes of that for a long time. But clearly, education levels reflect off of income levels when you're an adult, which also lead into people spending time in jail. I mean, there are direct correlations between these things, and it really hurts society. If you're not able to teach, in rural Oregon, part of the major issue that we have is we've lost a lot of the foundational tax-paying base because, the timber business used to have, in small towns, you'd have a factory, you'd have 2,000 workers, they'd pay into the school system. And, it's a small town Oregon is almost like a microcosm of, say, Detroit or Pittsburgh, right? So in Pittsburgh in the early 80s, because the steel industry shut down, you lost a quarter of the population. So that's happening, or has happened, across rural Oregon, but it doesn't get the same amount of attention, because when a town, goes from 20,000 people down to 15,000 or 10,000, the economic impact on that town, it's almost impossible to survive if you're a small business owner or a restaurant owner. But it doesn't get the attention that, a city like Pittsburgh would get.
Yeah, this idea of scale doesn't work altogether that favorably when you go down in scale versus up in scale.
Right.
So when you were talking the other, as you've been talking to your constituents and stakeholders and leaders around town, what are the top three issues that they're focused on? We've hit on broadband, education, and healthcare without breathing hard. What do they focus? And we've talked about the economy and inflation. What are you really hearing from your constituents outside of that?
Well, law and order, especially in Portland. Unfortunately, Portland was pre-pandemic considered the second most desirable city to live in America. Quality of life, I lived on the East Coast for 20 years. And so all my friends would say, oh, we are so lucky to live in Portland. We had unbelievable food and wine, and the quality of life was top notch. Unfortunately, I believe the last statistic I saw was we fell to 65 for best city to live in.
Wow.
In 2 years. So from 2 to 65, and it's really sad. I'm sitting in my old office in downtown Portland right now, and not far from me is the Bijou Cafe, which opened in 42 years ago, and it closed because of the pandemic. And it's just these small businesses. And once, businesses start leaving downtown, it's very hard to stop the slide. And so, I think that this is a real issue for people. We need to get downtown Portland back up and running, because even if you're from rural Oregon or you're from central Oregon, Portland is the largest city. I mean, Portland's basically 40% of the state's population. And so it's really important for Portland to be vibrant and to get back to the way it was. And people have told me in the real estate business, they're worried it's going to take 5 years for it to get back. And, if you go to the Apple store in downtown Portland, there's literally a 20-foot fence that surrounds it, because they had their windows smashed in during the riots. And those windows cost, $1 million a piece, because they're 3-story windows, and there's only one factory in the world that produces it. So it's really important to bring back a sense that it's safe in downtown Portland. And we need to give confidence back to the police department. They've been trying to rehire, thankfully, a bunch of retired officers or officers that quit. They offered 82 positions, and unfortunately only 2 of the 82 officers would even have a conversation about coming back on the police force.
Holy cow.
Our police force has gone from 1,000 people down to 600, high 600s. And and unfortunately, because the local politicians don't back the police force, nobody wants to work there. And so, we had a break-in in our building, and our ground floor tenants, the alarm went off at 2 a.m. They got there at 2:15. The police didn't arrive until 6 a.m. And they just said, listen, there isn't an active robber. We don't have enough manpower to even come and deal with your situation. So, yeah, it's sad. It's really sad what's happened to Portland. And, it really gets down to fundamentals of you can't allow people to just be lawless. We had 120 days of rioting, and, unfortunately, we're still feeling the effects of that a couple of years later.
So as a federally elected official, you're elected to federal office. How would you coordinate then with local officials to make sure that Portland has an opportunity to get it back on its feet as quickly as possible, and how the residents of Portland and the other residents in your district can get back on their feet as quickly as possible and have a quality of life that they once used to consider normal and now considered dreamlike?
It's hard. It's going to take a lot of hard work. Unfortunately, the momentum of, when cities start sliding, it's very hard to make it turn around. But I think from the federal level, what you can do is you can bring resources. As a Republican, I think almost anyone out there would say that the House of Representatives is going to flip to Republican control. And if Oregon only has one Republican, Cliff Bentz currently represents Eastern Oregon. If we only have one Republican, there will be a lot less pull for the state. Whereas if we had 2 or perhaps even 3 or 4, that would dramatically increase our input into bills and into spending. And it's important to have balance in your federal representatives, because if the federal government switches back and forth between parties all the time, and if you can only have input when one party's in control, that doesn't help your citizens. So, and I think having a politician that represents part of Portland really stand up and say, hey, I believe that the police are doing the best job that they possibly can. That means a lot. And building that confidence back is important. When you have members of the city council that are going out and saying that the police force was throwing Molotov cocktails, plainclothes police officers were doing that and trying to start riots, that's not healthy, and it really hurts the morale of the police force.
It's likely irresponsible as well. I mean, just without knowing more. So what I hear you say is that a part of this is a cultural issue where creating a sense of cultural support and community support for the police force that starts with leadership and goes throughout the community, finds its way in further support through financial support. It seems to me that there's another thing that may be valuable here too, which is you're likely to have a lot more visibility to the resources that would be available from the federal government that most people don't realize are available. I'm going to give you an example. FEMA does a fantastic job with helping communities recover from natural and man-made disasters. One of the things that's challenging for the communities is a lot of communities, small communities, don't have the scale or administrative staff to go fill out the applications to get the money from FEMA. At the same time, they have to raise some money, and that's hard as well. So I would imagine that, and as a result of that, FEMA has tens of billions of dollars of allocated but unspent money on its balance sheet because it was allocated for certain recipients, but the recipients didn't know how to go get it. And so it stays on the balance sheet because Congress has the power of the purse and they've allocated it. So I would imagine that you'd also have the ability to do that, where you have not only just the ability to see into what is available, but also I think you're uniquely gifted, given your background, to understand, to have the financial understanding of how to go make things work and to help culturally empower people by standing up as a leader and saying, hey, we got to wrap our arms around folks and not only create a big economic bear hug around the community, but also create a big cultural bear hug around the police force who need our support.
No, absolutely. And, FEMA is critical in Oregon because we're averaging about 1 million acres of forest fire a year now. And it's really sad. And in the 5th Congressional District, the Detroit area and Mill City area, a huge fire went through it 2 years ago. And today, unfortunately, there's still 700 people without homes. And this is a very small community. These are 2 former big timber areas. And, when I read something like that 700 people still don't have homes, it's shocking. And unfortunately, because of inflation and construction costs have now gone up 25%. So it's becoming almost undoable for people to rebuild their homes through the insurance that they had on their homes. And so something that the federal government, just like you pointed out, with FEMA supporting these homeowners, getting back in their dwellings is, that is something that the federal government is directly responsible for. And that is something I wouldn't be able to do as a representative.
Well, and it goes a step further, which is, you're touching on another very, very central issue to the human experience, which is hope.
Yeah.
If you're without a home after many, many years and you don't know when it's going to come, sooner or later, God forbid, you give up hope that you can get your way back. And that's hard.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately these communities just, they keep getting gut punch after gut punch, as I was talking about before, when you lose your mill and you lose all these, working blue collar, strong wage jobs, and they're not replaced with anything. And then all of a sudden a fire comes through, 10, 15 years later. It's very hard for these communities to rebuild. And Detroit, for example, there were almost every building and every home was destroyed in the city. And it's really sad to see. And yes, at the end of the day, that's what makes America one of the best countries in the world. The best country in the world, because we do give people the opportunity to pull themselves up and really get ahead. And unfortunately, if things happen that are out of your control, for example, not being able to go to school, if your home's destroyed by fire, it's very hard to recover from this, and this will impact generations. And that's one thing that I think that the federal government should be doing a lot of, and stepping in for the state of Oregon is higher education. Because higher education at the end of the day leads to a lot of opportunities. And unfortunately, Oregon has severely underfunded its universities. And we should have more Pell Grants, which I think are phenomenal, to help allow people without opportunities to get a college education. Because if someone goes to college for the first time in a family, that literally will affect generations after them.
So what I'm hearing you describe is a vision of the future that includes an economically strong set of communities that comprise a state, or that make up a state that is also economically strong, one where the communities are also safe for people to walk around in and raise their families in, and to some extent agile, meaning it's capable of being, because of the educational nature of its workforce, or the educated nature of its workforce, that it can be responsive to the changing dynamics of economic needs and business needs across the state. And that you want to be a bridge, not only as a leader locally, but also as a bridge to the resources available from the federal government. That's my synthesis of what I hear you saying. Have I missed something, or have I overstated anything?
No, and I think more now than ever, I think people are looking for a change in leadership in Oregon. There was a poll that the Portland Business Alliance just came out with, and this is a shocking number, but they said that 88% of respondents did not think that Portland was going in the right direction. I've never seen a poll like that. I mean, those are almost Afghanistan-like numbers. Clearly Afghanistan is a totally different kettle of fish, but I mean, those are numbers where people are kind of giving up on a city, and it's very hard to turn that around. And it's going to take bold leadership, and it's going to take people with new ideas. And I think that this is a time where someone like myself, who's not a politician, has an opportunity to run, and with a business background and some common sense, and can hopefully get some things done.
Well, I really sense a fresh perspective and a very capable intellect being applied to these problems, and a great deal of leadership that you can bring to the table. I'm really, first of all, I'm grateful that you would spend time with me on this humble little podcast. But really, I applaud your efforts, and really think you're going to do a fantastic job. I'm very confident you're going to make the rounds in Oregon and visit probably every community there is to visit. So you're going to wear out a bunch of shoes. Thank goodness Nike's nearby.
Well, thank you. It's really important that people like you care about issues, because unfortunately, not enough people are paying attention to this crisis that we're having in Medicare. I mean, these numbers are stark. And if people in Washington don't start paying attention, if people like you aren't drawing this huge megaphone to these issues, then they're not going to get solved. So thank you for your hard work. It really matters a lot.
Well, I'm going to reach out to you again, and I'm going to have you back if you'll join me, and I'm going to hear about an update, and also I want to hear sometime in the mid first year of your first term how it's going.
Absolutely. If I get elected, I will be there whenever I can. So I look forward to it.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Jimmy. We'll look forward to your success. Thanks for watching this week's episode of Civil Discourse. To learn more about today's topic or our guest, visit www.the60percentsolution.com or www.tfip.group.